Do you have to have 2 flight crews? So you fly for 8 hours and then you go to sleep and
You're
right.
Good afternoon. I appreciate all of you attending this afternoon. This should be a very informative meeting. I'm going to ask the Chairman of the House Education Committee, Brooks Coleman, to have the invocation for us.
If you would, please join us in prayer. Our most gracious Heavenly Father, how good it is to come to you and just to thank you, dear Lord, for all that you do for us. I want to thank you for this beautiful world we live in, for what the season we've just experienced, and just thank you so much for everything you do. Dear God, we're so thankful that all of us here today have a part in working for the education here in this great state. Help us to always be mindful of the impact we have on the boys and girls in this state and what we're doing for the future. We ask that you be with us today as we deliberate, we listen, we try to wrap our arms around what we can do in these areas that we're discussing. Please give us the wisdom, the strength, and give us the courage to do what's right. Always do what's right and vote what's right for the boys and girls. We ask you to be with us now, lead, guide us, and direct us. We ask these things in the name of thy Son, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think most of you know the purpose of today's meeting. We want to have a presentation on testing, specifically from the state standpoint, which tests are given, the purpose of the test, the time frame that the tests are given, the time frame for the return of the results of the test, and if those tests are handled through a third-party vendor from the state, and if so, maybe a little background on that. We'll also have some briefing on Cc Rpi because our testing and Cc Rpi are is so interrelated. After the presentation, we will have a question and answer period. I first want to give the opportunities for our school superintendents or their representatives who may be here today. I'm not going to start calling names because I'd forget somebody or not see somebody and you may be offended, but the order of the questions, we'll receive questions from the superintendents or elected officials who may be here. And as time permits, we will try to go through that process. I want to thank the state board for being here. I think they have 4 representatives. Mike Royal, the chair of the state board, stand up if you will, or hold your hand up. Barbara Hampton, Larry Winter, and Scott Johnson. We appreciate y'all being here and participating in this. As I usually say, it's time to light the fires and kick the tires, so let's do it. We've asked the DOE to come and begin the presentation. I think Melissa Fincher will be making that presentation. Thank you for being here, Melissa.
My colleague Allison Timberlake. She's our Director of Accountability, and she'll be talking about the Cc Rpi. But before we do that, I'll talk to you about the state assessment program.
And if any of y'all have problem hearing, let me know. We can adjust the sound up and down. I just don't want to get any feedback if we can help it.
Okay. So it's always good to start out reminding ourselves that assessment and accountability is not the driver in education. Really, education is about teaching and learning. And we have a very much of a test-based culture where so much is made about assessment and accountability. There's often people will say assessment drives instruction. I don't believe that. I think assessment should inform instruction. The content standards and professional practice should drive instruction. And just thinking about, Allison, I'm on the 3rd slide, assessment foundations. Remember that we're trying to measure something that we can't see. It's not like this table in which we can have a yardstick and measure it and know that it's X inches long. We're trying to measure knowledge. And so we have to sample students with questions about the content standards.
They have this on their desk, don't they? Are you talking from this?
Yes.
So everybody, you're on page 3 right now, correct?
Yes.
Or 2.
On 2.
Page 2.
Page 2, slide 3.
Slide 3.
Most assessments rely on a smaller number of items from which we make inferences about student knowledge. There's no way we can assess every concept and every skill that students know and learn throughout the course. There's no way that we can sum up everything a student does in the course of a school year. There's a lot that goes on. There are different types of assessments. Formative assessments take place during instruction and are used in an informal manner by teachers to guide that instruction. They're also used by students so that they understand where their strengths and weaknesses are and where they're struggling. Interim assessments are often given at specific periods in time after certain units of study and usually measure the content that has just been taught. So often there will be benchmark assessments. You may have heard that term before. So every 9 weeks there may be assessment that covers the content that has just been instructed. And then there are summative assessments. Summative assessments take place at the end of instruction and are used to certify that teaching and learning have taken place and that students have mastered content. The state mandated assessments, particularly Georgia milestones, are summative assessments. They're used in our accountability system, and they're used at the end of instruction to certify that students have had the opportunity to learn the content and to certify their the student's mastery. So in terms of which tests are state mandated, there has been a significant reduction. We do have in kindergarten the GKIDS, which is the Georgia Kindergarten Inventory of Developing Skills. That is a formative assessment that takes place across the school year. We have Georgia Milestones, which is mandated in grades 3 through 8, as well as high school. It consists of end of grade measures and end of course measures. For students with significant cognitive disabilities, we have the Georgia Alternate Assessment. That's a portfolio-based assessment for students with those significant disabilities, and that serves as the alternate to Georgia Milestones. So it's a small population that participates in the GAA. For English language learners, those students who have moved to our country and who do not speak English, we must assess their English proficiency on an annual basis, and so we administer access for ELLs annually, and that is in K through 12. That is federally mandated. And then on occasion, we are selected to participate in the National Assessment of Educational Progress. You've heard of that, NAEP, and that typically assesses students in grades 4 and 8, although other grades and content areas can be assessed. And state law does stipulate that when a school is selected to participate in NAEP, they must. That is a sample of students who participate in NAEP. It is not every student in the state. So what's the purpose of our state testing program? It is to measure student achievement of our state-adopted content standards and then to inform efforts to improve teaching and learning. How should the results be used? Basically as a gauge of how we're doing as a state in terms of education, informing the accountability system, and then identifying strengths and weaknesses in instructional practice and helping to establish priorities for educational programming. The big question is, how many state mandated tests do students take? And it does depend on the grade and the level of testing. In grades 3 through 5 and 6 through 8, most students will take 2 assessments as a result of Senate Bill 364. They'll take an English Language Arts assessment and a mathematics assessment. In grades 5 and 8, they will also take science assessments and social studies assessments. So in those 2 grades, we have 4. At high school, there are 8 end-of-course measures. I can get into the weeds and say, really, there are 10. Remember, we offer flexibility with mathematics. You've heard a lot about the traditional math, algebra, geometry versus integrated math. We have the choice there. Districts can teach either method, if you will, and there's an end of course to match that method. 7 are mandated to be taken by all students who are taking courses. Physical science is the one end of course measure that's not mandated for all students. Students can take either physics or physical science, and so only those students who take physical science take the EOC. Really good news is the state board just approved an amendment to the testing rule, and students who are enrolled in post-secondary institutions, move on when ready, dual enrollment, are no longer required to take some of the EOCs. There are some that they must take because of ESSA that every student succeeds at for federal accountability purposes, but if they're taking, let's say, U.S. history or economics at North Georgia College, they're no longer required to take the end of course. So here's a list by grade level of the tests that students take in the content areas. You also have the number of assessments that they take. These are assessments taken by every student. Remember, as an alternate, there is the GAA for students with significant cognitive disabilities, and then we have access for some students, not necessarily all students. So another question is, has the number of state mandated assessments increased or decreased since implementing Georgia milestones? It had actually decreased rather significantly. We've gone from a total of 43 tests in 13-14 school year to 24 tests this school year in 16-17. And again, that's not to say that every student takes 24 tests. Most students just take 2 tests. So what tests are required by the state versus what tests are required by the federal government? There you have a list by grade, though I've collapsed high school grade through 9 through 12 because students take the test when they're enrolled in the course, not necessarily when they're enrolled in a particular grade. Depends on when the system offers that course. Georgia does require more assessments than the federal government. The federal government does not require social studies be measured, and we do measure social studies. We have 4 assessments, grade 5, grade 8, and then U.S. history and economics in high school. Science is required to be assessed once in the elementary grades of 3 through 5, once in high school, 6 through 8, and once, middle school, sorry, once in high school. Does that make sense? Let me say that over, sorry. Once in elementary, 3 through 5, once in middle, 6 through 8, and once in high school. Georgia assesses science now. We're in line with elementary and middle. However, we have 2 science exams at high school. We have physical science and biology. Last year, we surveyed systems and asked about local assessments. And so when we took a look at assessments that are administered on the local level, the average was 5 in addition to state mandated assessments. Now, I should point out that all districts participated in this survey, and there's a wide range of the number of assessments that they administer, but anything that was state mandated, we asked them not to report. In other words, we asked them not to report Georgia milestones. We asked them also not to report the SLOs, the student learning objectives, which are no longer mandated as a result of 364. We knew that those were being administered. So these are tests that are on top of those, and the average was 5. The most frequent number reported, the mode, if you will, was 4. You can see that elementary schools had an average of 2 additional tests, middle schools an average of 1, and high schools, again, an average of 2 per district. So these are on top of the state mandated assessments.
Are these 5 tests per student or per district?
5 tests per district.
Yeah.
Why do we do local tests?
Yeah.
What's the point?
Maybe one of the, I think they want to know how students are doing. If you go back to what I talked about, formative or interim, they're gauging student learning as instruction takes place, and so they find that valuable.
Representative.
Or in between the state mandated tests in an effort to try to see where their students may be at that particular time?
That's my understanding, yes. Typically, they're formative or they're interim, and not necessarily summative.
Oh, thank you. I had a couple of questions. I was going to wait until the end to present it, but then they started asking questions. I figured I better jump in.
I work in testing. Questions are allowed.
Okay. Well, I understand that. Back on your assessment facts, it was on page 2 of our paper.
Mm-hmm.
It says what tests are state mandated. Down here you said when selected, students in identified grades, typically 4 and 8, must participate in a national assessment of educational progress. And you said that was that's a federal.
It's a federally administered test. That's correct. It's referred to often as our nation's report card. And we're federally now required to participate as well. It's also in state law that if a school is selected, the school will participate in
Okay,
it.
that's at random.
It is a stratified random samples. Students are selected to be representative of the entire state.
Okay, so if they're selected to be representative of the state, how many times when the school is chosen are those schools among those that are not passing right now?
Well, they use achievement as one of the things that they stratify on. So they select high achieving schools and low achieving schools because they want to reflect the population of students. If a school is selected, they just are administered one test for NAEP.
But if they know whether they're passing or not passing, then it's not random then, is it?
Well, they don't know how they're doing on NAEP, but they use the state mean for achievement. They collect our data, and they pull a sample based on school representation to match that, so that they can say they're getting a representative sample. NAEP doesn't measure exactly the same things that Georgia Milestones does, and NAEP is the one test we have in common across all 50 states. I'm not sure if I've answered your question.
You did. Going to page 5 on your assessment facts, and you said what tests are required by the state and what tests are required by the federal government. On these federal tests, are they necessary?
Well, they're the same as there's Georgia Milestones. Without them, we don't know whether students, we don't have a gauge to reflect on the educational system as a whole in our state. So when we say they're federally required, each state is required to have an assessment program. For us, it is Georgia Milestones.
Okay. This requirement, is there money tied to this requirement? In other words, if we don't do it, if we were to say we're not going to do that anymore, would there be money withheld from us for some reason?
In the past, the answer has been yes, but with the new administration setting forth, the Every Student Succeeds Act does mandate the annual assessment of every student enrolled in public schools.
One final question, Mr. Chair, if I could. Still on page 5 under assessment facts, how many additional tests do local districts give? You said the average is 4. What tests are these districts giving?
It could be locally developed assessments. It could also be shelf products that are sold to them. Many districts use STAR assessments. They use MAP. It just depends on what the local district has identified.
Okay, and are they testing in a different grade than what they might be testing as far as state required tests?
No, they're typically testing in all grades.
All grades. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Follow up with what he's saying. When you're talking about the locally, local tests that they're requiring, we had these hearings this summer, and I want to commend all the state board. They were most of them attended some of these. I was shocked to find some. You're giving me an average. What would you say? And I'm not asking you to talk about systems. What would you say is the largest number that a system's doing out there? Some of the systems, I've heard some huge numbers that shocked me.
The largest number, I think, is near 20.
Near 20
Near
additional
20 additional assessments.
tests.
Yes.
And that they're doing. Now, when to clarify this, everything, you say that the federal required test, and we said we chose to do the milestones. So actually, you're not doing, I heard somebody say 2 tests. No, we're doing one test.
We're doing one test.
The milestones accomplish just what the state wants and what the feds want. Am I correct?
Correct.
So we're not doing, I heard somebody say, is that 2 tests? No, that's just the one. Milestone is our federal test. Right?
That is correct.
And our state test.
Yes.
All right. Yeah.
Yeah, but let me make one point before we go on. The idea about the local test, I know when we passed Senate Bill 364, they said the common question that people ask, well, what about science and what about social studies? Doesn't this count? Well, sure it counts. And I think the reason you see so many local tests is because in any course of study, you have to have some assessment measure to determine the mastery of the student. And the fact that it's not a state-required test, you still have to have a measurement of some kind if you have quantitative measurement that needs to take place in a particular course. We're never going to do away with the amount of local tests. in addition to the state required test. But I do think that it makes much more sense on some of the local tests that we do, because they can be tailored to a local district's needs. And one of the beauty parts about a locally assisted test, a locally administered test, they are not governed by the testing windows that are available to have linked up with the state to have one test. And you can maximize instructional time before the final exam, if you will, in a class is given. So I don't think local tests are all bad. I think it needs to be within, a reasonable administration. But I do think to think that we're not going to have local tests in any discipline that the mastery can be quantitatively measured, then if we're not doing that, we're shirking our job in terms of the students.
I don't think the teachers were concerned about it. I think what they were saying is there's some way we could maybe substitute some of the state tests, some we're doing, we're given the flexibility, could they maybe do some of that and even decrease some more of the state tests, So they were just saying, I agree with what you're saying, and the teachers did. They were just saying a lot of times it's just stuff they're doing is more beneficial and does and gets at what they want more than the state mandate.
That's true, because a lot of the times the assessment's taking place during instruction or close in proximity to after a unit or a group of content standards have been taught, and so they get a lot of good feedback about how the student is progressing, as opposed to a summative assessment, which takes place at the end of the year, near the end of the year, and results don't come back as quickly, nor do they provide that really rich information about how the student is progressing by their nature, because we're sampling the knowledge and skills in the content standards, and it just doesn't diagnose Melissa's strengths and weaknesses as much. It says that she's proficient or she's not proficient, but it doesn't give that rich information that a teacher or local assessment would.
But I do think one of the challenges we face in looking at testing is the local testing. If we could come up with a common comparison that we could look at between the validity of a local test and a normed test or a mandated test, and be able to tell if there is a normed reference to if there's a reference to a known reference point, then you can compare the validity of both those assessments. I think Chairman Miller had a question.
Yeah, back to Representative Benton talking about NAEPS. Not the current board, not the current superintendent, not the current administration. But a few years ago, we were trying to tell everybody we were 80% proficient because our cut scores was ridiculously low, and the NAEPS would come in and show us at 37%, and parents are going, what the heck is going on here? So there is validity to having something by NAEPS when people try to game the system, because it's a constant throughout the nation, even though it's just representative, it's not necessarily every school. So I think it keeps local jurisdictions, keeps states honest down the road. We don't have that issue now, but we did. And
That's
so,
a great segue to the next slide, which shows some of that
and that shows you exactly where we really stand, because I just talked to a group of people and said, look, you hear about us being 48th, 49th in the nation. Here's where we are. And I used exactly what your next slide is. That's my segue. The fourth and eighth grade reading and math. We're reading, we still look in the middle of the pack. We got a lot of work still to do as math, but I think that's a fair statement.
Exactly.
I'm going to take one more question from Representative Belton, and then maybe ask if we can hold off for the questions until we wrap up the
I was trying to do a segue.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm a former school board member, and we did a map in one of our systems, and we loved it. And we would love the opportunity to replace the milestones with MAP, if that's what you're speaking to, Mr. Chairman. Because it's formative and interim, because it's taken 3 times a year. And I know it's a national test as well. Thank you.
Okay, so why was Georgia Milestones needed and developed? And we've just talked about that because we had discrepancy between the old assessment program, the CRCT, and the old end-of-course test. I often refer to Georgia as the land of the proficient. Come to Georgia, you too will be proficient. Because our tests were not rigorous. They'd been around for over a decade. And sent discrepant messages about how our students were doing. And you have some data from NAEP. For instance, in 2013, when we had a representative sample of fourth graders take reading in NAEP, 34% were at or above proficient. However, on our CRCT in fourth grade, 94 or 93% of our students met or exceeded. So Georgia Milestones was developed to be more consistent with what other national measures say how our students are doing, and to increase that expectation. And there you see that correction, and that was painful in 2015. In terms of where Georgia stands, I've provided you some information on the 2015 NAEP. We scored statistically lower than 14 states or jurisdictions. We're statistically similar to 22, and then we're higher than 15. We are not 49th. In mathematics in grade 4, as Senator Millar said, this is rather concerning. We are statistically higher than 4 states. We're similar to 19 states, and there are 28 states or jurisdictions that are scoring higher than us. For 8th grade reading, there are 5 states that score lower than Georgia, 18 that perform similarly, and 28 that are higher. And then in mathematics in grade 8, we have 8 states that are lower, 15 that are similar, and 28 that are higher performing. We will be administering NAEP again this school year. This is what we call a state NAEP school year. So we'll have students across our state in grades 4 and 8 take reading and math. And we have made progress on NAEP. We have made progress on a number of national measures in recent years, and so we're optimistic that we'll continue to see those trends. Who developed Georgia Milestones? My office is primarily responsible for the development. We do have a contract. Currently, that contract is with Data Recognition Corporation. They're in Minnesota. We do go through competitive bid process. That process was handled in the spring of 2013 by the Department of Administrative Services. The initial contract was awarded to CTB McGraw-Hill. However, last June, CTB was acquired by DRC. CTB no longer exists. And so in acquiring CTB, they acquired our contract. The test development process does rely heavily on educator input. We have educators come and review every aspect of the testing program, including the test items that comprise it, both before they're field tested with Georgia students as well as over. We've literally had hundreds of Georgia educators work on Georgia Milestones. And then we do have a technical advisory committee member of 6 national measurement experts that we vet everything we do with to make sure that it is appropriate and that it is technically sound. That takes place at least 3 to 4 times a year, where we really take a deep dive in everything that we're doing. The next slide shows the number of districts that have participated in the development of Georgia Milestones. The counties that are in white did not nominate educators, with the exception of Oglethorpe County. I do need to apologize to them. They did nominate, and somehow we managed not to select them each time. We will rectify that. In addition, we have Georgia Cyber Academy participating, the Georgia Virtual School, and the state special schools. We have also involved faculty members from the university system and the technical college system at every meeting for Georgia Milestones. One of the primary purposes is to send a signal of college and career readiness, and so it's important that we have faculty members who receive our students at the table. When do districts receive student scores? As quickly as they are available. We post daily. We update those scores nightly. We do not hold scores. And so as soon as one content area is ready, we post that. And then the next night we may have the other content ready, and we'll update that. In addition to student score reports posting electronically overnight, we give the districts an electronic data file on a daily basis as well. Now, it does take some time to score the open-ended items that we now include on Georgia Milestones, because we have to have trained readers score them. And so sometimes the results are taking 2 to 3 weeks to get back. That is not unexpected when you have open-ended items. Most states take 7 to 8 weeks to report.
Can I ask you a question about this? And Mr. Royal and I have talked about this. Let's look at a timetable here. The kids take this test when? The Georgia Milestones.
For the end of grade, they take it in April
All right,
typically.
so they take the test in April. Now, I want you to help me with this because I'm not saying it's fact. I'm telling you what I've been told. That they get certain scores they get back in a relatively reasonable time. But I was told by one system that they weren't getting the growth scores. Okay, the growth scores. So if a child goes back to school in August, they said they were getting the growth scores like in November. So my question was, whoever we're doing business with, that doesn't do a lot of good when the child started in August and the teacher wants to know where this child is if we're not getting this information in November. Now, I'm not, is that true? Did I misunderstand?
So there's a difference between the test score and the growth score.
Okay, but my question is this, okay? For what we're paying and for what we're getting, and the idea is to improve these kids based upon the teacher walking in that classroom and having a profile of that child, how do we get the growth scores and everything to as well as the regular scores, whatever we're going to call those? So when the teacher walks in the room in August, they got the profile on the child. How do we do that?
So the growth scores do not have to do with the Georgia Milestones contract. That's our staff. We calculate the growth scores, and one of the things we do is we wait until we've matched the test file to student record, which is the official record. The data is pretty messy, but we want the student demographics to be as accurate as possible. So that matching takes place over the summer months, and then my office calculates the growth scores. It is true those growth scores do not come out until later. We are looking at ways, and I don't know if Allison will discuss that, but to shorten that, one of the things we can do, which is what other states do, is just calculate it on the data that we have. But we will have missing data for students who don't code their GTID number, which is the number we use.
One final question. I understand what you're telling me, that it may not be 100% complete, but wouldn't it be better to have, when that child comes in that classroom in August, if we have that information for the teacher? If I'm the teacher, give me as much information as you really have at that point in time so I know where that student stands. That's a big complaint I've heard from people, and I think they would prefer to have, even if it wasn't totally complete, they'd rather have it then. If it's a money issue, if it's a whatever, I don't know what the issue is, but I think that's very important.
That's a legitimate complaint, and I don't think it's a money issue in this case. I think it is a process issue, and it's something that we are working on and we can correct.
Okay.
The other thing I do want to mention about the final reports for Georgia Milestones, sir.
I have just a general question. I always wondered when it came down to testing, is there a reason why we administer the test so late in the school year, where it's April, and it couldn't be moved up so that it allows for more time by the time the kids leave one? I'm just thinking about, say if they're in elementary and they move into middle school, and almost like what Senator Millar was asking about with those growth, that gives the school system enough time during the summer to kind of prepare for the kids when they get there in August. So I was just wondering, just as a question, why do we give the test so late in the school year? Senate Bill 364 has asked us to move the window back in the school year so that students have the opportunity to learn. And for the 2017-18 school year, we have done that. And so that does mean there's going to be overlap between the end of grade and the end of course. Now, why did we administer the test in April? Historically, that is when the end of grade has been administered. We've done that to prevent the overlap between the high school assessment and the elementary and middle school assessments. We do have a broad test window for the state because we don't have a sequence of, or a set calendar a state calendar for schools. Some other states do have that, and so we allow maximum flexibility. There's also a series of holidays in the spring as well as spring breaks. But for the 17-18 school year, we are moving the window back into May for the end of grade. The end of course has always been there.
Senator Tippins never has claimed to be too smart, but it would appear to me from a very simplistic standpoint that the later in the year we administer the test, we will maximize on instructional time. If the time exposed to material makes any difference, it looks to me like it makes sense to move it just as late in the year as we possibly can. If we have a problem turning the scores around, I think we probably need to look at that and see what it's going to take to get them in a timely manner. But if we're gauging our assessment on what these tests show the mastery of the students, we might as well go back to a 7.5-month school year, because that's basically what we're testing.
So hopefully the good news is that issue has been addressed. And I think I have a slide later on about that. I do want to talk about the summary reports. We do not provide the final summary reports until July. One of the reasons is, and those are how the school did, how the district did, and the state. Now, the schools and districts have their data, so they know that. But the final summary reports include comparative data for the school, the district, and the state. And because we have a variety of school calendars, we have to wait for the state window to close. We have to wait to process all those results, and then we can prepare results. The other thing that I'll just mention is that this is still a fairly new assessment system. The CRCT was administered for 14 years, and so we had that process and that procedure down. We've had Georgia Milestones for 2 years. As we have additional years, we will get economies of scales and things will move faster. In terms of how many assessments were administered in the spring, spring is the busiest time of year for us. In a matter of 2 months, we administered 3.9 million assessments in the state, and that is administered and reported. And we are moving the assessment system online. Last year, we administered 75% of the assessments online. This year, our goal is 80%. We are working with those districts who are not quite ready to move completely online to make sure that they have what they need and they are supportive. Along with moving the assessment system online, we have experienced some online interruptions. We had more the first year in 2015 than we did last year. Nonetheless, when you have a student or a group of students who are taking a test and the computer doesn't work, that is not comforting. We have multiple sections per test, and you can see that 93.5% of test sections were administered without interruption in spring of 16. For the end of grade, for the end of course, 97.3% were administered without interruption. We have done a series of analyses to make sure that the interruptions did not cause any systemic impact on the data. It did not. That doesn't mean that individual students were not impacted. So what steps have been taken to implement Senate Bill 364? We have eliminated the assessments in science and social studies in grades 3, 4, 6, and 7. We've taken those test items which we own and we placed them in an online repository for districts to use, including giving them an intact test form so that they can use those assessments formatively. We have reset the testing calendar for spring 18, just getting at the question that Representative Stovall asked. We've moved that window, so we're opening it later in the school year. The window opens on April 9th, and it will close May 18th. That's 1 week within Memorial Day, and we have 97% of our districts are anticipated to close before Memorial Day. So we have, in effect, moved that testing window towards the end. That was always the case with the end of course. It really was the end of grade that was administered earlier in the school year. And then Senate Bill 364 also calls for formative assessments in literacy and mathematics in grades 1 and 2. And so we've begun the development of a very innovative assessment system for those students that's developmentally appropriate. Young students should not have to sit down and take a 2-hour test. That would not be appropriate. So as we're implementing or planning to implement the Every Student Succeeds Act, we do have a committee of stakeholders around the state talking about what the assessment requirements in federal law mean and how they match up to state law. The assessment working committee is advising to stay the course for the time being with Georgia Milestones. We definitely need more formative measures that are of high quality, and that's something that we'll be exploring to inform instruction as it takes place during instruction. ESSA also allows an innovative assessment approach, and so there is high interest in investigating and exploring innovative ways to assess where we can reduce the burden on districts and schools, and so we are pursuing some of those solutions. So I think that is the end of my frequently asked questions. Happy to answer any additional questions.
I think Senator Millar has an infrequently asked question.
My question is, at this point, what can we do to help you? This growth thing is it disturbs me a little bit, because I think, you know, this is all supposed to be a tool for people moving forward. And what can we do to help you in that area or any other areas that we can finally get Chairman Coleman and Chairman Tippins to do something to help you?
So unfortunately, I'm going to be one of those people that, you know, Georgia has never funded the assessment and accountability system like other states. My office doesn't have staff like other states. I'll give you an example. South Carolina is much smaller than Georgia. They have a staff of 30. I have a staff of 21. If we had more staff and more capability and more resources, we would be able to turn things around much more quickly.
Do you have a budget number?
No, I don't. I won't make something up. I'd like to go back and analyze.
That would be helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Who is number 23?
$1 billion would be
Representative
nice,
Beth.
but that's not realistic.
It's not too bad if you say it pretty fast.
Play the lottery.
Yeah, exactly. I couldn't spend it if I had it. But.
Thank you, Chairman. And I'd like to add, this is not meant as a criticism, but getting the data in November is ridiculous. I mean, data is worthless at that point. And it's incredibly frustrating for these teachers to have to wait half a year to figure out what's going on with the students. And the students have gone on to another year, another grade. It really is very frustrating for our teachers to put so much effort into doing these, creating good scores, and then have to wait half a year. And the other thing, that's one reason why we do MAP, for example.
They don't have to wait. The scores.
The growth scores.
The growth scores, yes, but not the test scores.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's one of the reasons why a lot of these schools do MAP, for example, or these other tests, because they want interim data, and that's why they go to these. And I hope we can get out of it. I personally think that Georgia should get out of the testing business and go to one of these out-of-the-box things like MAP, which has already been vetted, and we know that it works. The other thing is, you say that only 6% of the computer tests go bad. That you don't buy a TV and
Absolutely.
every 100% of the time you turn on the television, it turns on. 6% is too much bad test. These high stakes testing, creates high stakes stress, and when we mess up that testing experience with a bad test, you're creating a lot of suffering for these students and these teachers, and we need to do better. Thank you.
Absolutely. I could not agree with you more, and I by no means mean to downplay it. If any student's sitting in front of a computer that doesn't work, that's absolutely unacceptable.
We have students, vomiting and all this stuff because it's a bad test, and then it's just something we need to do better. We cannot continue this way. Thank you.
Representative Chandler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Melissa, I hear from lots of parents that after the testing takes place, the EOG testing, and you've heard this before, nothing takes place in schoolwork. And I appreciate your moving it 1 week forward. Is there any reason why the window opens on, April the 9th? That early?
There are some schools who start really in July, and so they're ending their school year earlier, and so it's a matter of local choice. But there are year-round schools that close in early May. We typically don't have many schools testing the first window. We moved that back 1 week, and then we moved the close of the window back 2 weeks. So local districts can set their windows. We probably won't have many testing that first week, but we may have some who are closing earlier.
I just know if local systems see that window so early, they certainly have the option to do that. And
We'll certainly take it back and take a look at it again.
thank you.
Representative Cantrell.
Yes, Melissa, thank you for being here today. In tagging on to Representative Chandler's question, why would we not just change that from actual dates to somehow the window is related to where they are in the school year, so that it doesn't open that opportunity for a student, for a district that's, to test too early, but to have the window tied to maybe the 180-day schedule of the school. So we wouldn't be saying, well, some start here, some end here, but it's uniform across the board.
We have thought of that. There are so many variables in setting school calendars that are dictated by local communities. It becomes difficult for the state to mandate that. I don't know that it's impossible, but we've wanted local districts to set a testing window that met their needs within some constraints by the state.
Why wouldn't that be a problem?
I don't see
Your school said it should last 2 weeks.
No.
Or why? I just don't
Well,
understand
because we don't have a set school
doesn't
calendar,
matter.
and
That doesn't matter. The school's local control. They just decide. And why would that matter?
because of the religious holidays that take
Why
place
would
in
that
this
matter?
in the spring.
They could take that out of theirs. That's up to locals not to get that message.
I really don't think this would be
Yeah.
binding on you,
No.
Melissa, and I'm not trying to
Yeah.
pick on you, but I think originally in Senate Bill 364, I had in there that the final testing would take place within the last 2 weeks of school, and there was some discussion about, well, this may be operationally impossible. If it's operationally impossible, I agree with that.
Yeah.
But I think what we agreed to, that we were going to strive as much as possible to have these tests within the last 2 weeks of school to maximize instructional time and cut down on the amount of time that's not being properly utilized after the testing. But really and truly, I mean, the amount of time between when the test is given and the end of the quarter or the teaching period, learning may take place, but you really don't get any credit for it in your comparative analysis. So, I mean,
So the window as set now for 2018 does accomplish that with the close of May 18th.
well, let me ask you this. I mean, in taking all the districts in the state of Georgia and whatever their last day of school is, can we just have a window open that's open from 2 weeks before the first one to 2 weeks before the last one? I mean, that's if the window available now is that, and the districts are opting to give the test a month early, I think we need to be talking to the districts instead of DOE, because this is an efficiency discussion. I mean, how can we best get the most efficiency out of education dollars? And that's what the discussion needs to be. And I would encourage DOE to say, we will have the window open from 2 weeks before the earliest end of school to 2 weeks before the latest. This is where the window's going to be open. And if the school districts opt to not maximize the instructional time, I think we need to be asking the questions, especially if they're schools that their academic achievement's not where it ought to be. Any other questions?
Yeah.
Does that conclude your presentation?
Yes, sir.
Okay, would you introduce our next speaker?
Sure. Allison Timberlake is our Director of Accountability and is responsible for the Cc Rpi. And will talk to you about what it takes to calculate the CCRPI.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today. And so as you're aware, the CCRPI is our College and Career Ready Performance Index. It's Georgia's tool for annually measuring how well schools, districts, and the state are preparing students for the next level, culminating in being prepared for college and career. It does provide a comprehensive roadmap to help educators, parents, and community members promote and improve readiness for all students. It was created under Georgia's Elementary and Secondary Education Act flexibility waiver. It was our replacement to No Child Left Behind's adequate yearly progress. And it was designed to include multiple indicators in order to provide this more comprehensive picture of school performance. The current CCRPI includes 4 main components: achievement, progress, achievement gap, and challenge points. These are combined for a total CCRPI score on a scale of 0 to 100 with a possibility of 10 additional points. There are also 3 informational components to CCRPI: performance flags, which demonstrate the extent to which student subgroups have met performance targets, the school climate star rating, and the financial efficiency star rating. So probably one of the most frequently asked questions is, why is CCRPI so complex? Coming off of AYP, schools, districts, and other stakeholders desired a more comprehensive accountability system, one that had multiple indicators and provided much more than AYP's all-or-nothing system with a narrow focus on test scores. Significant feedback was sought during the development process. The final product included multiple indicators, both main indicators and extra credit indicators, that was requested by districts and other stakeholders. In order to calculate CCRPI, we do use a variety of data sources, up to 40 different data files, and we have several different data collection applications that we use to collect the data necessary to calculate these indicators. I don't intend to go over this picture in detail, but this gives you a sense of the different data sources and data applications that are used for CCRPI and how they feed into the variety of different indicators within that system. So following that question is there a plan to simplify CCRPI? And there most definitely is. The Every Student Succeeds Act, or ESSA, provides us with an excellent opportunity to review several years of CCRPI implementation and make improvements. We've collected significant stakeholder feedback on CCRPI, one through a survey directly to school and district leaders, through Superintendent Woods' public feedback sessions, as well as a publicly available feedback survey. Additional sessions were also held with a variety of stakeholder groups. Importantly, we have an ESSA Accountability Working Committee comprised of school and district leaders, as well as other stakeholders, that's been meeting since last summer once or twice a month to work through all of CCRPI and make recommendations for improvements. So what will CCRPI look like under ESSA? It'll be simplified. It will include fewer indicators. It'll be organized into more streamlined components. It'll utilize more straightforward calculations that are easier to communicate to the public. We understand that has certainly been a significant challenge with the current system, and we've been working hard to improve on that for ESSA. CCRPI will focus on universal goals and outcomes instead of encouraging specific programs. This is important because we want to retain the local flexibility that districts have to implement the programs and policies that are important to their communities and necessary to help their students succeed. We don't want to award points for certain policies or programs that may not be the best fit in all places. Goals and targets will be clear and more attainable. They will be aligned with the flexibility contract goals to the extent possible, the strategic waiver and charter contracts. And we plan to develop a new reporting system that is more visually pleasing and easier to navigate, communicate, and use for comparative and improvement purposes. Another frequently asked question pertains to the adjusted cohort graduation rate calculation. Federal law and associated regulations do require that states calculate the adjusted cohort graduation rate and that we use it in our accountability system. Students who graduate with a regular high school diploma count in the numerator of that rate. And then the denominator is all students within that cohort, students who were first-time ninth graders in the appropriate year minus those that left and those that came in. There are rules around who can be removed from the cohort. That includes students who transfer to another school or program that will lead to a regular diploma, emigrate to another country, transfer to a prison or juvenile facility and enroll in a program that will lead to a diploma. In Georgia, that's the DJJ, the Department of Juvenile Justice, or are deceased. All other students, including unknowns, may not be removed from the cohort. And districts and schools are required to have written documentation in order to support the use of those withdrawal codes. Beyond that, we are exploring if there is any additional flexibility under ESSA as it pertains to this calculation. Why does CCRPI change so often? 2012 was the pilot year for CCRPI. After it was released, feedback was received, and in coordination with the Governor's Office of Student Achievement, changes were made, and the 2012 CCRPI was recalculated. That calculation remained in place through 2014. In 2015, we first implemented our new assessment system, Georgia Milestones, and that change did require changes to CCRPI along with it. Some changes, such as indicators moving from extra credit to become main indicators, had been communicated since CCRPI inception. Even though they were included as part of the system early on, they weren't scheduled to be operational until later. Those were phased in order to provide districts with the opportunity to prepare for them. They may have been new indicators and new data that they or the state had not been collecting, so that gave them time to prepare and for us to establish data collection procedures. So those phased in as had been communicated from the inception. And then remaining changes are due to outside influence. One example is Senate Bill 364, which reduced science and social studies testing. We then had to make modifications to CCRPI to pull out the assessment and growth related to science and social studies since we no longer have those assessments. And then the implementation of ESSA will require some additional modifications for 2018. But it's our hope that with a simplified CCRPI, it won't be as susceptible to outside influences and changes. And so it is certainly a high priority that we have a system that remains consistent from year to year so schools know what's expected of them and can plan accordingly. So one of the big questions that I know is of interest today is why are CCRPI scores released so late? CCRPI calculations do depend on the multiple data sources that we had in the lovely chart before. All of the data necessary to calculate our current CCRPI are not available until early October. And so that's how we end up into early December when we get accountability scores released. The two major dependencies are assessment data and then graduation rate data and their related activities. As Melissa discussed earlier, we receive, even though schools receive their student assessment scores soon after testing, we receive the final statewide assessment files with all student data in midsummer. We then match that to student enrollment records. Districts then have an opportunity to review those matches, complete matches, and make corrections. For example, if a student's Georgia GTID test identifier was incorrectly bubbled in and we couldn't figure out who that student was, they can make those corrections. They also provide us with non-participation reasons. So if a student who was expected to participate in an assessment did not, they give us the reason why not. In some cases, such as medical emergency, that student would not count against the participation rate.
Mr. Chairman, I have a question. Let me get this straight. December, when did the school year end that we're talking about when you're doing the evaluations? I'm trying to figure out your time frame here.
Yeah, so the 2016 CCRPI came out in early December, and that was with accountability data from the 15-16 school year.
So
that
it
ended
takes
in
us
May.
basically a year.
Half a year, yes.
Yeah,
sir.
half a year then. Because
Yes,
you ended in June, let's say ended in June, is that what you're saying? So 6 months?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so it's 6 months, okay. Do we think that's unreasonable, or?
It is not helpful at all. I'm going to present to you a couple of things that we're working on, and as well, I will also provide you with some of the
That was going to be my
remaining
question, I guess,
barriers.
to you. When you said the 6 month, are you trying to make it 90 days or something like that, or 120 days, or I was just curious where you're trying to go with it?
Some changes that we're currently looking at, we would hope to be able to get CCRPI out by the end of October, but there are some additional barriers that would prevent us from moving that earlier, and I'll be sharing those with you.
Okay.
The other piece of that is the summer graduates. We include and are allowed to include summer graduates in the 4-year cohort graduation rate. So obviously we have to have summer take place for those students to have the opportunity to graduate. So we then collect that information at the end of summer. Several of the high school indicators use graduates as the basis for those calculations. And so here I have for you the timeline for the 2016 CCRPI. Again, I won't go into it in detail, but along the top in gray is when all of the different data sources that are required for CCRPI become available. You can see some of the last ones there are the SGPs, which is the student growth, and that becomes available later in the year. And I know we've discussed the delay with that as well. Underneath in red is when we're able to calculate the different pieces of CCRPI and provide that to districts, culminating in the public release in early December. And as I mentioned, changes that we have underway for 2017 and 2018 will improve this timeline. So what is being done to improve the CCRPI timeline? First is to calculate a simplified CCRPI under ESSA beginning in 2018. This will reduce the calculation and verification time, and it will also reduce the amount of data that districts must provide to us. Second, we are looking to streamline and modify the timeline for some of our data collection applications. This will provide districts with more time to complete them, but it will simplify the data collection process and provide all the necessary data earlier. Third, we plan to calculate some indicators in real time with the data collection applications. So while they are providing data in one application, overnight we will run the calculation for CCRPI indicators so they can see the relationship between the data they're providing and those indicators. That will improve data quality, and it will also decrease the correction requests that come in later for us to correct data for CCRPI. We are exploring these options and plan to start implementing some of them in 2017, and we'll be communicating with districts more information as that becomes available. What are the additional barriers to releasing CCRPI earlier beyond the changes that we're currently working on? First is the use of Georgia Milestones retest scores and summer end of course scores. Melissa shared that timeline with you. Currently, all the achievement indicators in CCRPI do rely on the summer retest and EOC scores. So even though the vast majority of students finish assessing in May or early June, the summer windows don't end until the end of July or early August. So we do wait for all of that data to come in and then get matched to student record and for districts to correct and verify those matches. So it is unfortunately into September before we can even begin calculating CCRPI. For main assessments, that process is complete in mid-August, but for retest and summer EOCs, the process is not complete until mid-September. So the use of those scores does add a month to the overall accountability timeline.
Can I ask you a question on that?
Yes,
What
sir.
percent is that August that you have to wait for that, what you just said? What percent does that really represent of the kids?
Melissa,
I mean, is it really meaningful? Is it worth waiting a couple of months for a couple of percentage points?
Yeah, if you're a school that improves, it's worth waiting for. However, with Georgia Milestones, we've not had full retest administrations, and so it's still unknown. For the CRCT, it did improve results for schools.
I mean, there's that many kids that...
For Georgia Milestones, about a third of the kids are not proficient.
So they are doing the retest. That was my question. I would do. So it's a good many children. We don't know the number. That's why I was asking.
Yes.
It's not like it's 5% or something like that.
No, it's about a quarter to about a third.
So that many kids are doing the retest.
They haven't done the retest yet, but they're eligible for the retest. Last year, the state board waived promotion and retention, and so many districts did not participate in the retest. We also had a slight delay in getting scores out because we needed to analyze the interruptions that took place.
So let's go going forward.
Yes.
What would you anticipate the percentage would be going forward?
Probably at least 25, a quarter of our
Oh,
students.
so it's that many kids.
Yes.
That was the question. We're trying to see if it was meaningful to have to wait a couple of months.
Yes.
You answered the question. Thank you. Well, then there's 25% of the kids. Yeah, a lot of kids. You answered the question. Thank you.
The second barrier is the use of summer graduates and graduation rates. That information is not available until the end of August, and so we do data collection activities in August and September. In 2016, we did have almost 2,400 summer graduates. It's not a small number. If we were to eliminate that, it would reduce our state graduation rate from 79.4% to 77.6%. It's almost 2 percentage points of that rate. Instead of eliminating that, we can adjust our data collection procedures, as I discussed previously, so we can collect all that information earlier and have graduation rates out in September. The third additional barrier to releasing CCRPI earlier are correction requests. Districts do submit data to the DOE through a year-long data collections process. There are multiple opportunities for that data to be reviewed before the district superintendent certifies it as accurate in June. However, historically, once we've calculated CCRPI, we start receiving requests to correct that data. And then accepting and processing those corrections does delay reporting to districts and the public. So despite its challenges, and we do know there certainly have been some, and we are working hard to address as many of those as we can, but despite that, CCRPI has been an improvement over adequate yearly progress. It goes beyond proficiency rates. It includes additional information on student growth, attendance, career education, coursework, pathway completion, school climate, and many other things, all of which that can be used for school improvement purposes. ESSA provides us with an excellent opportunity to review our implementation of CCRPI and make much needed improvements. District, school, and stakeholder feedback is a critical component of those revisions to CCRPI that are currently underway. And in the end, our goal is to calculate a simplified and streamlined CCRPI that provides a more accurate picture of school and district performance and plays that supporting role in assisting schools, districts in the state to reach their mission of offering a holistic education to every child and preparing them for college, career, and life. So that concludes my presentation, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you for your information. I do want to get some clarity. So from what you said earlier about the schools are collecting data year-round. So one of the questions, and kind of go back to what I asked earlier, if the school systems are able to collect data year-round, so and being able to give some tests that they're doing internally, would you say that how much percentage of data would they have to be able to even do an assessment before getting those main test scores back from the milestones where they can be able to start preparing for those students that are deficient instead of waiting on all the data that comes from milestones if assessments are being done out the whole time? Yeah, so Melissa, they do get their student assessment results back very quickly. It's the compilation of all of this into the CCRPI accountability system that takes us into the fall. I guess I'm trying to make sure I understand. If I know the milestones is a huge thing, and I know we keep talking about testing, so I'm trying to figure out if I was a parent and I know that my child is being assessed constantly throughout the whole school year, so wouldn't the school system already have an idea on what level those particular students are on, that they don't have to depend so solely on what the results or the milestones, because it's going to kind of almost tell them I'm just thinking as a parent, along the way where that student is, and that so much don't have to be built on waiting till those tests come back at that particular time. So I guess that's the question I'm asking. Yes, I believe many districts do have formative and interim assessments that they use to gauge student progress along the way to help adjust instruction as necessary prior to the summative milestones at the end of the year. Okay, thanks.
Representative Belton.
Thank you, Chairman. And you're right, this is a lot better than AYP, and I agree with that. But one question I have is are we moving more, we keep on moving the goalpost. I mean, my school system one time was the 8th best, and then we were kind of mediocre schools because we keep on moving. Are we going more for growth or for more raw scores in general? That's one of the conversations that our working committee of district and school educators is going to be exploring. Currently, growth counts for 40% of CCRPI. So it does have a high weight, and one of the conversations they're going to have is to weigh the balance between proficiency rates and growth. Which way we're moving, or do we know which way? We don't know yet. That's one of the conversations they still have yet to have. Okay, thank you. Just one brief comment. If it's so complicated that it takes half a year, then it's too complicated. And again, this is the CCRPI is another thing that we really, as a school board member, we were very, very upset that it takes this long. It just seemed like it's like an autopsy, like the patient's already dead.
You're not going to hear an argument from us.
Representative Baskey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Dr. Timberlake. I have a question on our page 2 of this presentation talking about the CCRPI components. One of the informational components is financial efficiency star rating. How is that determined? Is that by district? Is that by school? If it is by school, how do you determine the financial efficiency of a particular school? Is the dollars flowing to each school available information?
Right, currently, that star rating is provided at the district level, and I believe the reason that they have not yet applied that at the school level is because the department and GOSA are working with districts on how to handle that calculation for the school level.
So although CCRPI is reflected as a number for each school within a district, this particular component, the financial efficiency star rating, would be the same for each school within that district. Is that correct?
Correct. So the financial efficiency star rating is a district level star rating. We do, in addition to school level CCRPIs, calculate district level CCRPI scores and a state level CCRPI score. So on those district reports, we would provide the financial star rating, and the school climate star rating is a school level star rating.
And where is that information available online if we want to take a look at that?
It's on the CCRPI reports on the Department of Ed website.
Okay. One more question on page 4 of the handout, CCRPI facts. What will CCRPI look like under ESSA? The third bullet is goals and targets will be clearer and more attainable. I don't understand what that more attainable means. Does that mean that we're lowering the standards, or just because they are clearer, they are more attainable?
They will be the latter. So under our ESEA flexibility waiver, USED prescribed the formula we were to use to set annual targets for schools to meet. It was a statewide formula, so we used state proficiency rates to look towards the goal and determine the annual benchmark that each school would have to meet. The challenge with that is that schools who were far below that state average had a much steeper hill to climb than those that were already above it, who didn't have to make progress to do that. Under ESSA, it gives states much more flexibility in setting our goals. We get to determine the length of time, we get to determine the long-term goal, and what the annual or interim measurements will be. So we're working with that committee to take into consideration schools' starting points in setting those goals and targets.
Okay, thank you.
Fran?
Yeah, I appreciate, that what you've had to do with this, because there's a lot of changes on this program, year in and year out, because the complaint has been that every year it's changing, and it's like it's a moving target, and have to bring in outside consultants to explain how we need to do this, is what some of the school system would say. So I guess my question is, if I think it would be very helpful going forward, if you could give the chairman here a brief narrative of where we're going with this thing, and so people understand where we're going with it, if it is going to be simplified. I do know we treat schools pretty harshly under this from a standpoint of where we decide you're a failing school, if you contrast how other states, and I'm not faulting you for that. I think the rigor on your part is a good thing, but we have a lot of other schools and other systems that use something like this in other states that they don't have nearly the amount of failing schools because our criteria is a lot higher. I read that in several places. So but when we see 20% of our schools additional are now failing schools based upon the numbers that were just released, I think we need to let people know at this stage where we're going with this thing. And a simple narrative. I mean, for legislators, that means 2 or 3 pages max with pictures. Okay? But I do think it's very important, and I think it would mean a lot to your districts, because I tell you right now, when you talk to folks, their heads are spinning, and I'm not faulting you, but we're changing this every year. It's worse than what we do with the bills we pass, changing things every year. Of what this is, because this is probably the growth factor we talked about earlier with you, and the changing Cc Rpi every year. Those are the 2 biggest complaints I ever hear from folks. So if you could let us know, because you say we're going to be simplifying, doing this, if we can get some direction of where you're going with this thing, and then maybe for once here in Georgia, we'll actually stick with what we say and actually do that. But I think that would be very helpful, particularly to us as legislators as well.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
And Chairman Miller would request that his pictures be in color.
That's true.
Give me crayons to do it with, right.
I can do pictures.
Okay. Representative Chandler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Timberlake, thanks for this information. And I really applaud y'all for you for trying to get the information about graduation rates sooner. And I've been out of the education business a long time, and you know much more than I do. But I don't understand why you can't get withdrawal information at the end of May, except for those young people that withdraw from summer school.
We can, and that's one of the improvements that we'll be making. We'll be moving up those applications and those timelines to make sure that all that information's collected as the same time as when we finish collecting summer graduates. We do like to allow that because sometimes districts may get a request for a transcript later on that gives them the written documentation they need to support that withdrawal code. So we do want to give them every opportunity possible to provide those updates. But we do are looking towards closing that at the same time when graduates are available in August so we can streamline that.
Thank you.
I have two questions I'd like to ask. In terms of tracking graduation rates, do we have any flexibility at all in terms of the districts or the schools or both that have very high churn rates and very little way to ascertain where a student is? I think many schools are being negatively penalized. Is there any way that we could make that standard a reasonable effort, other than being able to guarantee and validate in writing where those students are? I mean, if somebody leaves and don't tell you where you are, we don't need to be hiring private investigators and also be penalized. So how much flexibility do we have in looking at that standard and changing it to a reasonable person effort, if you will? I mean, I think where we are right now is penalizes those schools that have very high turn rate and high transiency, and most of the time very little parental interaction with the school in terms that you could track them in any other typical form.
Yes, sir. We're continuing to review the legislation and the regulations to take advantage of every opportunity for flexibility that's available. At this point, the law is clear that districts and schools do have to have written documentation to support the use of those withdrawal codes. So they would need some kind of documentation, such as a transcript request or something along those lines, that a student has enrolled in another school or program or immigrated to another country.
But if a student just disappears and you have no way to track them, now is that a federal requirement that they're counted in that?
Yes. Yes, sir.
Is that changeable under ESSA?
ESSA has not changed that.
Can we request it?
We can
I'm serious. I mean, you take a school that has a very low churn rate, it doesn't matter. If you've got one that's turning over 35, 40% of their kids a year, and maybe even higher, they spend way too much administrative time tracking these kids. Second question is on Cc Rpi as a whole. What percentage of the total score is driven by student achievement?
The entire achievement bucket of Cc Rpi is worth 50 points, and 40% of that is straight proficiency rates. So that comes out to about 24 points. So about 24 out of the 100 is straight proficiency rates. And within that, we do weight the milestones achievement level. So students who are at the developing level get half a point, students at the proficient level get 1 point, and students at the distinguished level get 1.5 points.
If you could prepare a real simple primer on how those calculations are. I know we're looking at failing schools now, and it maybe would concern me that a school would be failing because of an issue of school climate, when in fact their academics may be where they ought to be, but I haven't analyzed that data, so I'd like to see that. Thank you.
I'd like you to give us some real live examples. I don't know whether you have to, if you block out the name, have to, or whatever, but I'd like to see it. And how you went about it.
Okay.
Maybe visit those schools.
Okay, we've got some time. I want to open the floor for some questions. I would first like to give the school districts, the superintendents, and or their representatives an opportunity to ask questions. And if you would, if you're going to ask a question, come to the microphone so the question can be heard. Please identify yourself, who you're with, and pose a question. Senator Clay, it's always great to have you.
I promise not to testify, but I have members from superintendents from Cherokee and associate superintendents from Cobb and Fulton, and I don't know, they're not here to question, but you had requested I have some of the members. Could they come today? And I just didn't know protocol. We signed a list, but how do you want them to work?
Well, I'm not sure where the list is right now.
Got it right there.
Is this have they signed
They've
up?
signed up to speak. All that list.
Okay, but has everyone had a chance
Everyone
to
had an
sign up?
opportunity.
Okay, I'm gonna call what's on the list, and then if there's another question from the audience, we're gonna take them. First one, you're on the list.
Yes, sir. And I promise not to testify. I just want to introduce very, is this on? Stand here? I know you can hear me, but. About a week ago, I was asked, and I'm here representing the Georgia Education Coalition, which is 10 of the larger school systems that represent about 35–40% of the kids, and also districts that both the chairs here are part and members of. We're certainly partners with all the other great representatives of the education groups. But on a specific request, I've got Superintendent Hightower from Cherokee, Academic Achievement from Cobb County, Dr. Davis, and then a couple of members from the admin office in Fulton County. They can either be as short or as involved as you'd like them to be, but I know their time is valuable too, and I just want to say that's why they're here. Alvin, Dr. Wilbanks and McCluskey who had been here, they had an unavoidable conflict of some type that they had to be at a funeral today. Hopefully not either one of theirs.
It's my understanding both of them are alive and well. Superintendent Hightower from Cherokee. And I'll call you in order, Dr. Davis from Cobb, and Dr. Goldie, and Dr. Peruglia. Peruglia. Well, you might ought to put a little bit of phonetic marking on it. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Chairman Coleman and Chairman Tippins. I appreciate the opportunity. We wanted to thank you for the time that you're putting into these efforts to really look at the metrics that we're ultimately going to be graded by. You made several mentions of the fact that these are high-stakes situations. Our schools are being graded, our districts are being graded. And so the emphasis on the metrics we're paying a lot of attention to. I want to thank Dr. Timberland and Dr. Fincher for their input today. We feel like they have been responsive. There have been a lot of changes. Some we liked, some we didn't, but just the fact that our state board is responsive and staff is responsive, we appreciate that. We believe that there are some things that we want to continue to work on under Cc Rpi. We think there are some disproportionate numbers. You saw in the newspaper reports that we had more schools that were considered failing this time than last year. I think some of that is, I'm not trying to explain it away, but I think some of it is a cycle. It takes 3 years for a school to get on, so we've got schools in the cycle, and you'll see them roll off. I think as they gain better control of Cc Rpi as a metric and do a better job, I think you'll see some numbers rolling off. I do just want to say about the metric, there are a couple of things that I really am concerned with. When you look at the schools that are on the list, the largest percentage of the schools that are on the failing list, they receive federal funds to mitigate poverty. Okay. We also see that a large percentage of the schools that are on the list are elementary schools. And so I think there's a marriage there between the two. Not every school that is on the list, Laura, let me say this, not every school that's scoring in the 60 range right now, we believe, is broken. We've got two schools that come to mind in Cherokee specifically. We've got a school that was in the 60s this year that was awarded as the top elementary school in the Technology Association grouping. They got the TAG award this year for elementary schools in Georgia. They have lots of challenges. One, again, they're in elementary. Secondly, their poverty rate is in the high 80s. Okay. We also have a school that's one of 13 elementary schools in the state to get the STEM certification from the state board. They have been scoring in the 60s just this year, barely bumped up into the 70s. Those schools are not broken, but they do have additional challenges. I liked your question about the star efficiency rate. Are schools taking the monies, and are they producing and providing results? The trap with the efficiency rate, if you don't mind me editorializing just a second, is those very schools that we're talking about that are struggling, we are pumping more money into them, but they're also, their scores are still the lowest under Cc Rpi. Now, in that star efficiency rate, they're going to come out on the bad end. So it's going to take some money, I believe, to turn these schools around. They're the farthest from they're challenged. They're the farthest from the mark. But what we are seeing is that as those students matriculate into middle and high, that we're seeing good results out of them. So it's somewhat about taking the metric and making sure that you're not harming kids in the standpoint. There are going to be some lags, but there's going to be some lags that we believe that schools, given the time and the right interventions, can answer the bell. And so we appreciate your consideration there. As we look at the metric, it is high stakes. We're talking about 2 years ago in the legislative session, there was a vote to put on the referendum ballot, the potential schools takeover. Okay, that's as high stakes as it gets. I know that this year, as part of your session, you're going to look at, okay, do we have a plan B for failing schools? I don't want us to ever, as a practitioner, lose sight of the fact that we've got to pay attention first to the metric, and then what do you do with your metric? Do you respond on that? So I appreciate that, and I appreciate your consideration today.
I'm surprised. Go ahead.
Well, since we've got you up here, we're going to take advantage of it.
You did have questions about timing, didn't you?
I want to know what you perceive of the things we've talked about here today on the assessments.
I tried to write a lot of notes, Senator Millar.
I just want to know from your perspective if there's a couple of things that jump out at you that would really make a difference between the assessments and the Cc Rpi that you see as a superintendent on the ground that really would make a difference to get us to the goal of increased achievement. I just don't know what you think.
I think, and this was actually a position that the governor spoke on earlier this week. He felt like there was a test out of UGA that found that the schools that were scoring between the 60 percentile and the 89, which basically, if you stuck a grade on there, it would be B, C's, and D's, that the schools in that range were being graded more harshly than others. And the governor actually spoke to that and talked about how do we mitigate that harshness. My message would be the same. How do you mitigate for those two schools that I mentioned, where you've got great things going on? Granted, those are inputs, and there has to be a great balance between the inputs that you're giving kids and the outputs that you're receiving from them. How do you mitigate the harshness that you sometimes in seeing high rates of poverty, high rates of English as a second language, high rates of services, whether they be social services or special education services? How do you mitigate that? And where is the consideration for those schools?
And there really isn't in what we're currently doing.
There are some ways that schools can earn some bonus, some challenge points that are built in. In the current contract that we have with GOSA, and about 80% of your public school districts have signed a contract, a flexibility contract. There's an accountability side to that. You don't count those points in on the flexibility contract, so that's one side where that does hurt us.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you. I will, if you don't mind me saying one thing about the timing of the testing, you grilled Dr. Fincher pretty well on the timing of the testing and how we can move. And I know Representative Cantrell asked about trying to just say, do you say at the 160th day you take the test regardless of what your calendar's like? The play is the retest, and some districts want to test early so that they can retest before the student leaves, or before the student has to do summer school based on their scoring. It's a complicated question and a complicated answer, but that piece and having the availability of your results is why some of our school districts go very early in the testing window in the spring. Would that be correct, Dr. Fincher? Yes.
Appreciate that. I just want to, you're saying what we're wanting to know. I would like, you said you had two schools that you talked about.
Yes, sir.
I would like to bring a team, 2 or 3 out there right now as we look at some ways to deal with the failing schools. Because you brought up points that I'm having a hard time with myself. Being an elementary principal and teaching elementary, I have a hard time seeing an elementary school fail. If we can organize, I'd like to meet with you soon.
Yes, sir.
And just take these 2 schools and you give me specifics. This school is here, we think, because I want to know those kind of reasons.
I will tell you, if you visited those 2 schools today, well, they're not in session today, but tomorrow. they would knock your socks off. We actually did have our senators come through. We had Lieutenant Governor Kasel, Katie Kasel come through, and we didn't tell him that they were targeted schools. And we blew their socks off.
And I'd like to know what you're
that's
doing.
great discussion, yes, sir.
What you're doing to turn them around, what you see as the solution, that's the kind of things we're looking for. So I'm going to contact you. I appreciate
Yes, sir.
And other superintendents.
To the credit of the state board that's here, they have some pieces in play for those title schools.
right.
And both of those schools created what they call flip plans, and both have responded very well. So there are some fixes there that they have supported.
And we feel that. We feel that there are things there in the law already and the
Yes,
state
sir.
board that we can do, and we just wonder, are we doing them, and what haven't we?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Howard.
Doctor, can I ask you a question before you leave? You mentioned the poverty schools that were poverty stricken. A lot of those landed up on the failing school list, and our system down in Augusta, that was the assessment that we came back with. Also, our superintendent identified mobility as one of the issues, because in the poverty stricken schools, you have a lot of kids that may be in the school for 2 or 3 months, and because of situations at home, they move to another location. Now they got to go to another school for the next 2 months, and for the next 2 months they go to another school because of their circumstances at home, which is no fault of the kid. Is that the problem? Have y'all done an assessment to see that may be part of the problem as well?
There's a lot of educational research about high transition students and their lack of achievement. The lack of continued quality educational interventions on behalf of that student, it impacts them negatively, absolutely. Some of our high transition schools are also some of our high poverty schools, and they struggle. These are our schools that are in our 60 and 70 range and below. Yes, sir.
And the wraparound services.
Yes, sir. You're chasing services the entire time with those students. Yes, sir.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
I'm going to take one more question. Representative Stovall.
I have a question. This is dealing with the LDS system, longitudinal data system. It's my understanding that the students' information is inputted in, and I'm just wondering with the transit situation that we're talking about, once they are transferred to another school and all of the schools are now on LDS, wouldn't your school system be able to pick up that child came from this school and be able to have access to the data that was inputted into it to kind of be able to help? And in what ways would you all suggest that we can improve on the LDS? Because I know they've been doing a great job in DOE with the LDS to making it more accessible and for more school districts to actually utilize it. And that was one of the things I did hear from Bob, that most of the school districts are really not utilizing LDS like they could.
LDS is the solution for chasing that student. You get real-time academic numbers and background research, linear test scores, all of your demographics. That's a big solution. If a system is not using LDS to their benefit, they're really handicapping themselves. It's like going into a fight with them putting one hand behind their back themselves. The students are they need us to use LDS to its max. Yes, ma'am.
The next speaker is Dr. Mary Elizabeth Davis, Chief Academic Officer of Cobb County. We're proud of her in Cobb County and the job that she does. Dr. Davis.
That's right. Well, thank you, Chairman Coleman and Chairman Tippins, for this opportunity to join you, and greetings, members of the Joint Committee. It really is an honor to stand before you today to be a part of this incredibly important discussion. It actually is two of the topics that hit closest to home to every single educator, every single child, and every single parent in the state of Georgia. And I think there's great power in these discussions. I actually want to point to and thank the successful passage of SB 364 as an example of how we've been able to see very close to home impact. For example, in Cobb County, we were able to reduce the number of assessments, the student learning objective assessments, from 196,857 last August and December to 70,179. That was a significant decrease in the number of tests that students sat in front of and took as we started our school year this school year. So thank you. And thank you for continuing the conversation, because we do believe that there's actually some opportunity for policy refinements to address two specific continued improvements in this area. First, let me start with the focus of our summative state assessments has a pendulum that seems to have swung to school accountability and teacher accountability, and unfortunately became further removed from student learning. We believe that the balance could be better placed with just a few refinements to our policies. And first, let me start with the length of the tests that do remain. In particular, our math and ELA tests that remain in our elementary school are still incredibly lengthy tests. For example, this coming spring, a third grader will sit for almost 7 hours in the math and ELA state assessment alone. A fifth grader, where we will have math, ELA, science, and social studies, will sit for approximately 11.5 hours. We still see that as a rather grueling reflection of the students' learning over the course of the year, but we don't believe it's necessary to decrease the rigor, while we may take a very close examination of how to reduce the length and the amount of time still spent. A third grader sitting for 90 consecutive minutes in a math assessment is a pretty laborious moment in that child's life. I did some comparison, and I can tell you that in Florida, for example, a third grader sits for about 5 hours, which in a course of a week is still 2 less hours than a Georgia student is sitting for a state-mandated assessment. So without compromising the rigor, I do believe we could reduce the length of the test, and that brings me to my second point. And many of you have already addressed the turnaround time for the results. State law does grant the state board the authority to determine the appropriate turnaround time, and this year that has been determined at 15 days. Well, that means in Cobb County, we will be receiving the results from our tests with maybe 1 day to retest our students before the school year ends. And that is a real implication for the 25% that Dr. Timberlake had pointed to. The second topic of accountability, I believe there's 2 key points that are important to educators in Cobb County, and the first is simplifying it, and I am so grateful for the leadership of Dr. Timberlake and her articulation of our shared value of having a document that can be communicated and a value and a number that can be communicated to the public. But the second is I'd like to elaborate, Senator Tippins, on your point regarding the graduation rate. We currently have one example high school in Cobb County that does have a 36% transiency rate. That means 1 out of every 3 students that walks in the building is going to walk out at some point in those 4 years. Last year, they posted a 64% graduation rate, and by most metrics, that's not considered very impressive. But for students that started in 9th grade, 90% of them concluded 4 years later and graduated. That is a big difference in the story there is to tell, and we think that the accountability metrics could add a second way that we articulate the graduation rate, so that we're not solely subject to the federal articulation of components contributing to that graduation rate. We want to make sure that the story is fully told for the communities who do value education in their backyard and actually see great results for the children that they have in those schools for consecutive years. That concludes the points that I wanted to bring to your attention today. But before I turn it back over, I do want to point to our tremendous gratitude for Dr. Melissa Fincher. She has demonstrated such outstanding customer service as she has led an incredibly complex task of delivering an assessment system for the state of Georgia. We like to joke in Cobb County that she actually picks up the phone when you call. It's sort of amazing because she does not make you feel like you are one of 3.9 million test givers, that you're the only one that matters to her right then. So thank you, Dr. Fincher, for the service you provide to our state.
Any questions, Representative?
What would be your suggested solution about the graduation rates? How would you solve that?
We would like to offer that a second calculation be produced that brings as much value that the calculation the state produces right now. I understand our federal restraints, but a second calculation that could say the number of students that start in 9th grade that graduate 4 years later is X%.
What is the federal constraint right now? I mean, how long does that student have to be in your high school to be included in that graduation rate?
So the components that Dr. Timberlake actually was articulating a little earlier, the key is the documentation that you have to provide when a student leaves your building. And while there are a lot of students who go next door to the neighboring school, there are a lot of students that don't return to a school in the United States or don't return to a schooling environment at all. And that's where we have an intense amount of adult time aiming to track down where students have gone. And I just think it becomes rather shocking that highly educated personnel that are employed are on Facebook trying to find where a student may have gone so that we can secure documentation. And we recognize the value of educating every single child to the best of our ability every day they're in our schools. But when the family chooses to leave our schools, I think we need to remove the accountability on the school.
So you're saying, just so I'm clear on this, the bigger issue is not when they come in, it's that they disappear before and they get counted against you and you can't find them.
So there's a sub-narrative to that conversation, and that is the overage student that enters into a high school or a middle school without any earned credits or any formal education from their previous either home or country environment. And so we actually see many 17 or 18-year-olds entering school for the first time with no credits in our metro high schools. And I think that we might want to consider alternative ways of measuring the impact a school has for a student under those circumstances.
I agree. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Davis. Our next representative is from Fulton County, Dr. David Goldie.
Chairman Coleman, Chairman Tippins, members, thank you so much for allowing us to be here. Dr. Fincher, Dr. Timberlake, thank you for all you do. Dr. Fincher is very accessible, as our testing fiascos occurred with internet access and everything else. She was great to help us through all that. Everything that they presented today as Fulton County Schools, we actually do mimic. The 4 issues I think all agree to are that CCRPI is very complicated. It is hard for us as a charter system where we have very local school control, where our principals are very accountable to the local community to be able to explain to the community and the principals as a group what CCRPI is, and how it's measured. So we appreciate the efforts you're trying to do to simplify it. We've also mentioned this too, whether it's CCRPI or the results, they're not timely, which hurts us in terms of what we're doing with our kids, whether it's remediation or acceleration, or just for our teachers in general, as you mentioned earlier. How do they know to improve their teaching, their craft, to address the needs of those children? So again, we appreciate you all trying to look at that as well. The assessment timeline window, again, is also sometimes challenging. Fulton County does try to do a lot of their testing electronically, so that does help, but we still want to make sure that the timelines are timely and efficient for our kids. And the last point is metrics, whether it's the tests, whether it's how we're evaluating children. Those have been changing over time, so it's hard to compare one result from year to year. So when we're speaking to the community, we're speaking to legislators, when we're speaking to the media, it's hard to, I hate to say it, it's comparing apples and oranges sometimes. So again, we appreciate everything you brought up, and we look forward to the benefits of that.
Thank you. I just wanted to have a brief word about assessments. You are in the most impossible position. Having been a teacher in Fulton County and an assistant principal and test coordinator, we want the test to be at the last day of the year to maximize instructional time. And then we wrote the results the next day. So Fulton fully supports your bid for $1 billion funding, okay? But we accept the challenges. We appreciate the fact that you're aware that you've taken feedback and that you're aware that improvements need to be made. So we're very supportive of testing as late as possible in the school year because we want to maximize the instructional time. And if we're testing in April, maybe we're increasing the number of students who are failing these assessments because they're missing out on almost another 2 months of instruction. So by pushing the assessments towards the end, we may see higher proficiency rates just by doing that. But I would also like to reinforce that the feedback from the data, the assessment results, to come back as soon as it possible so schools and teachers can make plans and preparations for the students for the next year. Sure. Yeah.
And again, we appreciate the efforts of Senate Bill 364, especially as we're looking at the removal of SLOs, as we're looking at what students who are dual enrolled. We're also looking at what we do for our students as we try to create more high achieving kids who have more access to options after they graduate. What does the AP test do to the regular assessment? Just other tests that the kids are taking. We want our kids to do well. We want them. Graduation, as we talk about in Fulton County, should not be the goal. Every kid should graduate. We just want to make sure they have viable options for what they have afterwards and how to prepare them best to meet that. So again, thank you for what you all do. Thank you for what you all do.
Do we have any questions? Thank you all so much for being here. We've still got some time. I want to entertain any questions that may from anyone in the audience. I don't know that if there's a sign-up sheet out there, I don't see it other than the one I have. If you'd like to ask a question, please stand, identify yourself. If you're with an organization, identify the organization. Yes, ma'am. If you would come to the podium, please.
Let Randy ask his question.
Oh, I'm sorry, Randy, I didn't see you. Go ahead, Randy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question is this. I know that we have driven
You through a desire for accountability and measurability to probably you're building this airplane as you fly it. Do other states struggle with the same issues we do in terms of timeliness? Is there a better system to make this work to get the data that we need? And I know that you've done a great job, but I do feel we've pushed it, and it is building the airplane when we fly.
Other states do not report their results as quickly as Georgia does. For instance, I work closely with Florida. They're 7 to 8 weeks. We're 3 to 4 weeks. It's very common with open-ended items for it to take time to process that. You're literally talking about tons of test materials for paper or hundreds of thousands of student responses that have to be scored, and that just it has to be right given the stakes, and that takes time. I don't know of another state that reports as quickly as we do. That doesn't mean that there is not one. I need to do more research.
So we're doing a relatively good job with what we've asked you to do in the systems in terms of getting it in and doing the best we can with it. There's not like there's one state out there that gets all this stuff done in a week or something.
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay.
And I've asked that question repeatedly.
Okay, thank you.
Melissa, I agree, could you give us a list of what it would take? You've heard all of this, and we're getting ready to go into this, but could you give us just my wish list? And I don't mean just blast it out, rainbow wish, but to get the job done, to really what we've asked you for. Could you give me a list of what it would take? 2 more people, 1 more person, 100 more people, this, that, and the other. Just jot down some stuff where we can talk about this, and that would be very helpful, because we're getting ready to have these budget hearings coming up, and thank you.
Is there
Certainly do that.
Is there any steps that we could take that would make it more efficient by increased use of technology?
Now give us all that.
Have we pretty much maxed out those opportunities?
We have not maxed out technology, although we need to go slow to go fast, if you will. We need to make sure that it's not just devices, but it's bandwidth, its capability. It's also the student comfort with the devices. And I was talking to a superintendent in South Georgia who really feels like his students did not do well on the online administration. Online is quicker. It is more expedient. It's like email. It can be in front of a score as soon as the student hits submit. But we need to be thoughtful about that. We need to make sure that schools are prepared. I just need some time to reflect on the comments that I've heard, and I want to be thoughtful and giving you the ideas about what we think it will take to get it done.
We want to help.
Yes, ma'am. If you would come up, identify yourself, please.
I'm Lisa Morgan, and I am a teacher every day. I happen to be on a personal day today. I teach in DeKalb County schools, and I teach kindergarten. And I teach in one of those schools that's on the list. I've taught in the same community for 17 years. My school is not a failing school. The teachers in my school do everything we can for our students every single day. And I'm so thankful today that I've heard some things that I've sat back there cheering. Transiency. Our children move. We have been back in school 4 days, second semester. I have had 2 students leave, and I have had 3 students move in. When you all were considering the OSD, I told you this. I've taught in I'm in a new school because we moved to a new school. They consolidate our schools. But I've taught in the same community for 17 years. 2 years ago, the last year in our former building, there were 96 fifth graders. I taught 1 of those students. I had 21 students the year they were in kindergarten. 1 of them made it to 5th grade in my school. Last year, I went through the 5th grade. I found 2 of my former students. This year in 5th grade, I have 1 former student. It's not about the school. It's not about what's happening in the school. It's about the community and the poverty these children live in. We can't fix it inside the school doors, although we do everything we can. I'm very thankful today to hear about that we may be simplifying Cc Rpi, and I appreciate that. Let's simplify Cc Rpi so that it is about teaching and learning and that we are maximizing our instructional time. But let's also think about those challenges. One of the things I was thinking as we were talking about that we are trying to get more of our students tested online. It's not just the access to technology in the classroom. We also need to consider the access to technology in their homes. I had 22 students before Christmas break, and we have a wonderful program that my school has purchased a license for my students so that they can work on their reading skills at home, and it is based on where they are. And my kids love it because it's a game. And we used the laptops in class, and they loved going on and playing, and it was reading skills at their level, so each child could work on it at their level. I sent the information home with my students so they could work on that over the holidays. 3 of my students had access to technology to use that over the holidays to increase their reading skills. And one of my students, she told me, my daddy has a tablet and I did it at his house, but when I came home to mommy's house, I asked mommy to let me do it, and she tried to put it on her phone, but it didn't work on her phone. So we can't say my parents weren't trying, but they don't have the same access at home, and that is an issue, and that will impact Cc Rpi if we're asking all of our students to use technology. The final thing I would like to ask you to do, talk to the teachers. Find a teacher in one of those schools in your community and talk to them. Call me. I'll tell you now, my phone number is 770-313-3625. Talk to the teachers on the front lines, because we're in this together. It's all about our students. For me, I call them my babies. But we have to get it to where we're not punishing teachers and schools for the community.
Were you among the 2,000 teachers that got the email, came to our hearings we had this summer? What you're saying, we did talk with you, and we heard what you're saying
Right.
from teacher after teacher. So I appreciate what you're saying. You're right on target. And we heard from over 2,000 teachers. Meaning I'm saying exactly what you're saying, correct?
I remember the lady.
Yeah, I remember. That's what I'm saying. You remember that. You came.
Yes. Thank you.
We have some questions, ma'am. Representative Belton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is for Allison Timberlake. Who exactly decides what the calculations of CCRPI? Is it Department of Education going to do that? Is that correct?
It's in conjunction with the Governor's Office of Student Achievement.
Okay. So, I mean, y'all control the variables. It seems like, I mean, to me, this should be easy. We should be able to put in the numbers, and 5 minutes later, put them in the computer and spit them out. I mean, it should not take half a year to do this. And, I mean, it seems like we ourselves, or Department of Education, or GOSA, whatever, are creating their own problem in the sense that it's become too complicated. That's my interpretation. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Identify yourself, please. And
my name is Terry Thomas. I'm an education consultant, LLC. I'm also an advocate for Georgia House Bill 481, which was advocated by former Representative Ron Mayo. And what 481 implies or is curriculum reform that reflect the state. 481 is a mandate or a proposed mandate to teach black history and diversity, meaning African American history from an African Center Foundation, Native American, Jewish, Holocaust, women, and Latino histories from their perspective. I don't see Representative Dickerson, one of the people who co-signed the bill, but I really would like to talk to you about diversity. I am a retired teacher, 20 years. I taught in the state of Florida, but I'm a native of Georgia, raised in Wilcox County. And my 20 years that I was teaching, I found that even though my school was labeled an F school, that's Belgrade School, Belgrade Middle School, and Lakeshore Middle School in Belgrade, Florida, it's not necessarily the labeling, it's the personnel. I look on Facebook and find some of my former students that I taught art, journalism, and mass media, and they are doctors in Kenya. They are architects in Boston. In Palm Beach, they have their own education business. It's not so much the school labeling, but the sense of self-esteem that they can derive from a good, wholesome dose of who they and what they are. So I want you to consider House Bill 481, Mr. Chairman, and debate it. I'd love to talk to you about it and consider it.
all right, sir. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Anyone else have a question? Yeah, John Zoner.
Mine will be very, very quick. John Zoner with Georgia School Superintendent Association. We really talked about a lot of great things, I think, today, and there was a lot of things to absorb. But one of the things that I wanted to mention was that CCRPI right now is on a 0 to 100 scaled score. And I guess my question is to these two ladies here today, and has it been considered, and I know you said GOSA was involved in developing a lot of that, has there been any consideration in looking at the scaled score and broadening it out from instead of 0 to 100 to 0 to 150, like some of the other states that maybe some of you mentioned? I think Louisiana, Florida also have a scaled score. Has that ever been considered or discussed?
It has been considered and discussed. Current state law does require the 0 to 100 scale.
Yeah, my point is that it's driven by state law, and right now it's 0 to 100, and I think that may be an issue that we need to discuss further when we start looking at does it really reflect what we want it to reflect when we're measuring student achievement or growth? So that was my comment. Thank you. Thank you.
You know, at one time when Marty Robbins was entertaining, he was real bad about running late on a concert. And if he felt like it was a good concert, he'd stay. And I'm gonna stay a little bit. Any of y'all that need to go ahead. I want to give Representative Stovall the opportunity to make an announcement about tomorrow. And but I want to, if anyone else is here to express a comment or ask a question, we'll give you the opportunity.
Let me say this before my committee members leave. We don't have our committee yet. We'll have our committee appointed probably in about a week, hopefully. But in about 2 weeks, we're going to have another joint session. A new chairman and everything, I think. But it won't be Millar. We're gonna have the higher ed change, but we're gonna have another joint session, and what we're gonna have, and invite the Senate. We're gonna have the partnership. We have several of you. Any of you who'd like to present, say anything to the committee, present any of your information, get in touch with my office. We'll put you on the agenda. I know the State Department has already asked. Superintendent Woods asked. I know you're gonna do the 10 top priorities. We'll have everything. So let us know. We're going to have about an hour and a half, 2 hour meeting. So let us know. That's going to be in 2 weeks when we come back after the holiday. All right. So I'm sorry.
Representative Stovall.
All right. I definitely want to invite all you all who have not heard, the second annual Educate Georgia Summit will be taking place here at the state capitol starting tomorrow, which is Wednesday, January the 11th, and then conclude on Thursday, January the 12th. And this is an opportunity for all of these discussions that we're having, and we're just not going to have elected officials there, but we'll have educators, parents, students, our business and community leaders. Last year, we had about 300 in attendance for the 2 days. This year, we've already had pre-registered over 650 people, and this is throughout the state of Georgia. And so we're really excited. It's a free summit, and if you already been outside, you saw the big white tent over in Liberty Plaza. It's a heated tent. We'll be there, and some of our sessions will be located in the Capitol and over at the Floyd Building. So you can go on the website if you want more information at educatega.com. And we're definitely on Wednesday. Tomorrow we will hear from our very own chairman here, and also our State Board of Education chair, Mike Royal. And I think we're going to even be able to get Senator Tippins, our chair for higher ed, in on the conversation. And on the second day, on Thursday during lunch, we will have State Superintendent Woods, who will be there as well speaking. And also we'll have greetings coming from Speaker Ralston. And so we have a variety of speakers, and it's a conversation. So I encourage everyone to participate. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Stovall. Anybody else want to make a comment, ask a question?
Put your lighter up in there.
I think they just put on last date. I think the dance is over.
When it's over, it's